Hello and welcome back to Saxon Math. This is classifying quadrilaterals. It's a new concept. We learned in lesson 60 that quadrilaterals are polygons with four sides. We can classify or sort by the characteristics of their sides and angles. The following table describes the various classifications of quadrilaterals. So we have trapeziums, which have no sides parallel at all. We have a trapezoid, which has one pair of parallel sides, while the others are not. There's a parallelogram, which has two pairs of parallel sides. So these are parallel, and these sides here are parallel. There's a rhombus, which is a parallelogram with equal sides. That means each one of these sides is the same length. There's a parallelogram with right angles called a rectangle that we're most familiar with. And a rectangle with equal sides is a special name called a square that you're very familiar with. Notice that squares, rectangles, and rhombuses are all parallelograms, every single one of them. Also notice that a square is a special kind of rectangle, which is a special kind of parallelogram, which is a special kind of quadrilateral, which is a special kind of polygon. A square is also considered a special kind of rhombus, because a rhombus is a parallelogram with equal sides. A square has equal sides, so it's a special kind of rhombus as well. The prefix for quadrilateral is quadra, which means four. A quadrilateral is a polygon with four sides. So is the following statement true or false? All parallelograms are rectangles. Well, if you go back to the previous page here, you can see that these parallelograms listed in this are not all rectangles. You can see that each of them you can see is the rhombus, the square, trapezium, the trapezoid. Those are not rectangles. A square is a special kind of rectangle, but in the statement itself, all parallelograms are rectangles, is not true. We are asked to decide whether every parallelogram is a rectangle. Since a rectangle is a special kind of parallelogram, some parallelograms are not. Some parallelograms are. So since not all parallelograms are rectangles, this statement would be false. This is not true that all parallelograms are rectangles. How can we rewrite the statement in this example so that it's true? We could say that all rectangles are parallelograms. If we switch those two around, then yes, that would be true. That would be a true statement. Example 2, draw a pair of parallel lines, then draw another pair of parallel lines. These lines should intersect the first pair, but not be perpendicular to the first pair. What is the name for the quadrilateral that is formed by the intersecting lines? So here's the first pair of parallel lines, and if we were to overlay a second pair of parallel lines so that the lines are not perpendicular to the first pair, we could have this. Perpendicular, if you don't remember, means it is a 90-degree angle. So straight 90 degrees, that's perpendicular. If those lines intersect at a 90-degree angle, that means there's 90, that's a perpendicular intersection right there. At the right, we've colored the segments that form the quadrilateral. So you've got this blue color right here. That quadrilateral formed in this case would be considered a parallelogram because these angles here are equal and these angles are equal to each other, but it's not a special kind of parallelogram that we would consider like as in a rectangle where they're all 90-degree perpendicular intersections of lines. So this would be considered just a parallelogram that was created here. This shape right here is a parallelogram. All right, so what is a quadrilateral? True or false? A parallelogram with right angles is a quadrilateral. So if you answered in this case, if you look at a parallelogram with right angles, it is a quadrilateral. So a parallelogram with right angles more specifically would be called a rectangle. And because it has four sides, 1, 2, 3, 4 sides, it's a quadrilateral. That would be true. That's a true statement. How about this one? True or false? Describe the difference between a parallelogram and a trapezoid. Trapezoids have right angles. True or false? This one should have been false. If you go back and look at the picture of your trapezoids, you can see that this angle is not a right angle. This is not a right angle. Neither is this or this. It just has one pair of parallel sides. So it could be, say these two right here could be parallel like that. We could end up having, it could really end up having one that's like 90 degrees and then one that's not. So this could be a trapezoid. You just have to make sure that one pair is all that's parallel. So these are the ones that match up or parallel, and that in this case, when we're looking at that question there, trapezoids don't have to have right angles. That'd be false. As you look at the example here, there are no right angles in this trapezoid. Letter C, draw a rhombus that is a square. This rhombus, or this is a rhombus that is a square. True or false? So for letter C, you should have said true. This is a special kind of rhombus called a square. It's also a special kind of rectangle. Letter D, draw a rhombus that is not a square. This is a rhombus that is not a square. True or false? This would be false because this one is actually considered a rectangle. A rectangle is not a special kind of rhombus. Only a square is a special kind of rhombus. What's a rhombus again? A rhombus has to have equal sides. So because a rectangle does not have equal sides, it has two shorter sides, two longer sides, it is not a rhombus. This was a picture of a rectangle. So this is a rhombus that is not a square. It is not a rhombus, so it's not a rhombus. It's definitely not a square, so you might have been thrown off by that. It is not a square, so you might have said, oh yeah, true, it's not a square. Well, it is also not a rhombus. So the answer is false. This is a rectangle. In letter E, true or false, some rectangles are squares. The answer would be true in this case because a rectangle could also be a special kind of, or a square can be a special kind of rectangle. A square is a rectangle with equal sides. So a square is a special kind of rectangle. So some rectangles are squares. So that would be fine. You can see that a square is a rectangle. So some rectangles have all equal sides. And what does it have to be a rectangle? It just has to have two pair of parallel sides with 90-degree angles. So it has to have that. So letter F, true or false? All squares are rectangles. The answer to that is true. All squares are rectangles. They are rectangles. If you look at that, a square is a special kind of rectangle, so no matter what size the square is, it is a rectangle. It's considered a rectangle because it has right angles in it. A rectangle has right angles. Well, a square has right angles in it too. A square has right angles, and a square is a special kind of rectangle because it has equal sides. All right, that's all for today, guys. If you missed anything, you need to go back and review the lesson that we just covered and review the classifications of quadrilaterals in your textbook. Remember to do lesson 64 for the written practice. You need to do 1 through 30. You must do 1 through 30 in order for Saxon math to be effective. Saxon math is a spiraling technique that allows you to practice your math lessons from previous lessons throughout the year. So if you do not complete 1 through 30, you are not getting the practice required to learn the concepts. Make sure you do 1 through 30 in lesson 64, and we'll see you tomorrow.